Good morning and Shabbat Shalom from St. Francisville, Louisiana. As you can tell, I'm not Ross Nichols. We've put Ross in the southern deserts of Israel for a while. He needs a little time out, so we gave it to him. A little meditation time. No, he's actually at the Blossoming Rose Park, which we at United Israel have a really nice relationship with. It's what we believe biblically known as Tamar. And in fact, my wife Patty and I and Dave and Sherry Cole are going to be going over there on November 1st and volunteering some of our time there. It's a great thing to go to the land. So today I have a commentary that I'm going to give, not really a lesson. And then we're going to take a small break, and then we're going to have a panel. And I have them kind of designed as two halves on the Hebrew faith. So a lot of people ask me, what is your faith? And if I say it's the Hebrew faith, they automatically think of certain religions and so on and so forth. And so I wanted to kind of start with that. I believe that there was a clarion call, and the Almighty said this to us a long time ago in the book of Jeremiah. It comes from Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16. And thus saith Jehovah, stand ye by the way and see, and ask for the paths of old, where is the good way, and go ye in it, and find rest for yourselves. And the people said, we don't want to go. I think you should go that way, and I want to talk about that way today. So to say what is a Hebrew, I'm going to give a little bit of a talk here on the whiteboard to kind of give you some of the timelines and why people might be confused about things. So Dave, if you could follow me over here, we'll kind of start in the beginning, kind of. So in the beginning, there were no Jews or Israelites or Christians or Muslims. There were just people that lived on the earth. And the story in the Hebrew Bible comes with the creation of Adam. And as time progressed, mankind kind of went the wrong way, and God kind of had to do a reset, if you will, like you do on your computer, and that was called the flood. Afterwards, there came a man, and his name was Abraham, or it was actually Abram. And God called him out of the land of Ur and in modern-day Iraq, and told him to go to this promised land, and he would kind of set up some things for him there. And him and his wife Sarai went, and lo and behold, their names were changed by God to Abraham and Sarah. He said, you'll be a father of many nations, and and the whole world will be blessed. So Abraham was kind of the first Hebrew, although we believe the name came from Eber, one of the children whose name we now commonly say is Hebrew. By the way, the Iberian Peninsula is believed to be named after Eber. So as time went on, a lot of things happened, and along came Isaac, and then came Jacob. And so Jacob is the one whose God changed his name to Israel. And so this was where the promises were made. So we will hear us refer to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Also at this time, Ishmael was born before Isaac, and he was part of Abraham's small family. The genesis of most of Jews and Christians is under Isaac, and it's believed the Muslims come mainly out of Ishmael. But they're all people of the book. And so the book that I'm talking about is this book. It's the Hebrew Bible. It's otherwise known as the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. It's almost identical to the Protestant Old Testament. The Catholic Old Testament has more books than the Protestant, but the 66 books of the Protestant Old Testament are contained in here, somewhat differently separated. So as we know, Jesus only spoke of this book. There was no New Testament. And he told us to live according to this book. So as time went on, just quickly, the Israelites kind of disobeyed God, and a lot of problems happened, and they went into bondage into Egypt. And then they were called out of Egypt and led by a man named Moses. And that's where our story gets really interesting. Moses is the one who had the theophany with God, and he went up and got a lot of this book. A lot of this book came from Moses talking to God face to face, which I can't imagine. That theophany must have been incredible. So then after that, the Israelites left, and the story goes through the Passover story, and God led them out, and they disobeyed him, and so he made them wander in the wilderness for some 40 years. But actually, they wandered mainly for 2 years, and they stayed at a place called Kadesh Barnea for 38 years. But they were in the wilderness, not in the so-called promised land, the land that was promised to Abraham. So they were going back. This was a great thing. So as time went on, they finally get into the promised land, and they live there with all kinds of problems, and they really changed their points of view. They were impacted by the locals. So the religions of the Fertile Crescent really impacted the what became known as Israelites. So there's still only a small amount of people in Israel at that time called the tribe of Judah. So there's not even really a Jew at this point in time. So Abraham's considered a Jew. He's not a Jew. Isaac is not a Jew. Jacob is not a Jew. One of his children was Judah. And the Jews were generally those folks that were in the southern tribes of Israel that were taken away into Babylon. Of course, the northern tribes, Jacob had 12 children, the northern tribes were taken away into much earlier into a different region. The Jews went to, and the Benjamites and a lot of the Levites went into, and they were all mixed, no doubt. They went into Babylon, and they're the ones who came back. And at that time, they're kind of called the Jews. So this is the way the story started happening. There were a lot of prophets that came along and would say, you got to come back to me. As this clarion call I just gave you is saying. And then there's a lot of the writings in the wisdom books that are commonly called the Tanakh. Ezra and Nehemiah kind of created this canon, and it's been carried through faithfully by the Jewish people ever since. Obviously, Jesus was a Jew. And so as the story goes, he spoke only to the tribes of Israel. He even says this in his talking. I didn't come to talk to you Gentiles. I came to talk to the lost tribes. So one of the kind of tenets of our belief here is the fact that there are a lot of folks that are part of those northern tribes, the 10 lost tribes, and that we're finding our way back. A famous and good friend of mine that's a rabbi said the Christian New Testament and the Christian Bible is an ark that carries the Torah to 2 billion people. And I kind of look at that because that's how I came out of this whole thing. So a couple of things that I wanted to say in a commentary way. The Torah is a guidebook for life. It's not just a law, it's instructions on how to live. And I think throughout the Tanakh, one of our friends, Dennis Jones, who is studying to become a rabbi or might already be a rabbi, he said that the Tanakh, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim shows the perfection of the law and people not being, not following it, and God's grace. And at the end, God says to the Israelites, come back and be my people and I'll be your God. There's a lot of grace and mercy in the book, and it's kind of not viewed that way. So I want to just quickly talk about our group here, United Israel, just so you know. United Israel World Union is a 501c3 educational research organization founded in 1944 by David HOROWITZ, who is of Orthodox Jewish descent, who devoted his life to its goals and purposes. Its primary focus is to function as an association of any and all who are drawn to the one God of Abraham and the revelation of the Holy Scriptures, or the Tanakh. It's not a religion, and people have said different things about United Israel. It's not a religion. It's a place for people who wanted to study the one God of Abraham. And trust me, you're going to hear in this panel today, there's a lot of different viewpoints about who God is and the whole, and we allow this. There's no doubt about it. So some of the people that are in United Israel are not just casual observers or casual readers of the Bible. First and foremost is Dr. James Tabor, who is got his doctorate in the study of religion and Christianity and Judaism. Has been a chairman of a department of religious studies at University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and Dr. Tabor has written many papers and many books. But this book, I think, is the best one for the beginner. It's called Restoring Abrahamic Faith. I'm going to talk about this book today and my summary of this book that I think is very important for you to understand. This book is a phenomenal book. It takes the religion out of the Bible. So what this is what does the book say? We want to say what it says, and we don't want to say what it doesn't say. We don't want to add to this book or take away from this book. So that's an element of this book that I find fascinating, and I've been reading different versions of it since the early 90s when we met Dr. Tabor. James also wrote some other good books. One of them is The Jesus Dynasty, and this is an amazing book about the kind of messianic fervor and the whole kind of context of Jesus and his brothers. James also wrote another really good book that kind of takes apart what happened to the religion of Jesus, Paul and Jesus. And this book is really filled with the conflict that arose and the salesman that Paul became. Another book that we have is a short little volume, one called Jehovah Exists or Yahweh Exists, written by Jodel Onstadt, who's here. And Jodel is got great stuff in here about the history, the covenants, the government, and kind of correlates a lot of this. It's an incredible work. The point being is that these are not just people that casually look at these things, and you're not going to hear certain types of philosophy here about how to make money in religion or anything else, but about how to be responsible. What's that? No airplanes, Jodel said. No airplanes, although I do like them. 33 Candles is written by David HOROWITZ. And then there's another book that's coming out that I wanted to read to you. It's called The Book of David, which is about David HOROWITZ. And it's David HOROWITZ, Dean of the United Nations Press Corps and founder of the United Israel World Union by Ralph Bunton. That'll be coming out this fall. And so this is kind of the story of David up to the founding of United Israel, and Ralph, who's on the board of United Israel, and a great friend of ours, Ralph and Becky Bunton in Asheville, North Carolina, is writing this book, and I know Ralph can really write well. If you want to know more about United Israel World Union, you can go to unitedisrael.org, and a lot of the writings are there. Of course, every week at 10:30 Central Time, Ross gives his lessons on the Torah, and don't be intimidated by the depth and detail that Ross goes into. It's just we really like to get into the facts of the Bible versus what people think the Bible says. So that's what it is. So I want to go through a few more elements here and kind of demystify some things for everyone. One of the things is it's unfortunate that we have to read the Bible in a language that it's been translated into. There's a couple of things that if you study Hebrew, you're going to find out. It's not only different alphabet, the alphabet. It's not only written from right to left, so it's good for the left-handed people. It's a different way of thinking. And if you think about how Yoda thinks in Star Wars, that's kind of how Hebrew is. To the store I will go, and this kind of stuff. But also is the meaning of the words. So one of the great things about Hebrew is that it's focused on a three-letter shoresh, which is the root meaning of the word. And then as they expands, like in its intensity or its meaning, they just add letters onto that same word. So in English, we have a whole different words for doing that, right? I broke the window, I smashed the window. Well, in Hebrew, you're just going to raise up the intensity of that same verb. So that's an important thing. Unfortunately, the English Bibles have, I believe, enormous mistakes. In the King James Version, the original King James, it says in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. That's not what the commandment says. It says thou shalt not murder. And there's a big difference, because why would God tell them to kill people if it was against his commandment? Murder is the improper killing of someone. It's to say, I'm angry at you, I'm going to kill you. You can't just kill somebody because of that. So that's murder, and there's a big difference. And there's a lot of other things that are kind of mystified in there. For instance, almost 7,000 times in the Tanakh, the name of God is given as the Lord, or Lord in capital letters. And this kind of is confusing to people. God has a name, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So there are really three pillars of the biblical or the Hebrew faith. And that is that Jehovah is the creator. I didn't say God, because that's a problematic term, and I'm going to talk about that. The Torah is his way, and Israel, both the people and the land, are his chosen ways of doing that. In the book Abrahamic Faith, James Tabor does a great job of kind of a corollary to these. One, knowing God. It's a whole chapter, and that's, the name Yahweh or Jehovah, and that he's a creator. Following the way of God, that's the Torah, and participating in the plan of God, which he established through the nation of Israel. Even Paul says in one of his books that we must be grafted, if we're not, into the tree of Israel, and I like that. I like Robert Eisenman, who did a lot of very good work on the Dead Sea Scrolls and wrote some books on James. He's an eminent scholar, and he said, just come and join us. You don't need to go through all this, crazy conversion stuff. And I really like that. And in fact, what I was going to read here just quickly, or quote, is in the 56th chapter of Isaiah. The 6th verse says, and the foreigners that join themselves to Jehovah to minister unto him and to love the name of Jehovah, to be his servants, everyone that keeps the Sabbath from profaning it and holds to my covenant, even them will I bring into my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. To me, that's really all that's required. You're going to serve the Almighty, and you're going to do it in the way that he prescribed. One of the things that God obsesses about is the Sabbath. And this is kind of lost in a lot of religions. And in the obsession of the Sabbath is, he always says things like, those people that follow me, they're the ones who keep the Sabbath. Like, that's how he describes these people and know his name. And in my life, when I started celebrating the Sabbath, it changed everything. It made a beautiful impact on me, that I kind of had a balance so weeks didn't just run into weeks. There was a flow to life, and I think that's extremely important. One of my things that I'd like to talk about is that you really don't need to know a lot to have the Hebrew faith. Yes, there are people like Dr. Tabor and Joe Dell and Ross that really are scholars at this, but we're only given so many fingers. So let me tell you this. There are 10, I call them commandments, but they're statements, because there's a lot more commandments in the 10 than that. There's 10. You should be able to count these out on your hands, right? If you don't, just look at each finger and remember one of them. So the first one isn't even really a commandment in the Jewish reckoning. It's that God's name is Jehovah, that brought you out of Egypt, but that's another thing where you can look at Prager online and he'll explain why that's used, right? Then there's no idols, not using his name in vain. His name is so important because there is no statue, no idol of God, that you can't use his name in vain or profanely. So most people think that's swearing. Well, that's not just swearing. It's to say that you're doing this in God's name and you're not really. Then there's that transitional commandment, right? The Sabbath. So the Sabbath's for both of us, right? It's for God and us, right? So that's the beautiful thing about it. So, you remember this, that this is the only commandment that has that promise in it, right? That if you do my Sabbath, your lives will be long and you'll have good things happen to you. Then there's the commandments about not committing adultery, not bearing false witness. That's much better than a lie. False witness. If my wife asked me, "Do I look good in this dress?" and I said, "Yes, you do, honey," and I don't think so, that's not bearing false witness. That's just being a smart husband. But if someone said, "Did you see this man go into this building at this time of night?" and you did see them, and you say no, that's bearing false witness, and that's where it comes to the matters of the heart, right? That you shouldn't murder, and that you shouldn't want to be anyone else. That's the real thing. The 10th set of commandments is the catch-all that says, don't covet your neighbor's wife, don't covet their house, their animals, don't cover anything. And that works today too, right? Because they didn't have cars back then. But if you see a car or a big screen TV and you're coveting it, it's your neighbor's, it covers everything. So the 10 Commandments kind of are viable for that. So that's the one thing that I would say is the focus. There's really two other things that come out of this, and that is that there are some prohibitions about what you eat, and primarily if you stay vegetarian, you don't have to worry about it. But if you do eat meat, you can't eat. There's only certain animals, ruminants, that you can eat, and only certain fish that you can eat. So no hunting squirrels, chipmunks, no eating snake, no eating shellfish. Here in Louisiana, there's a lot of that going on. They're the bottom feeders, So I think that's an important thing. And then there's another group that is really important to me, and I think to all of us, and that are 7 holy days. And you really should understand that these go far deeper than just days that you got to survive, right? The first one is misspoken of as the Passover. It's actually the first and 7th day of unleavened bread. But this is the Passover period. And the Passover is an event, really. So in those 7 days, we remember the time in Egypt, and we don't eat any leavening. We clean our houses of leavening. And for those 7 days, we feast, really. Then 50 days later is Shavuot or Pentecost, right? And that is the Feast of Ingathering, the first time the fruits were given, and it's a joyful thing. Then we have a break, and we come up to the next feast, which is called in Judaism Rosh Hashanah, head of the year. And it's not even really called that in the Bible. It's really the Feast of Trumpets. It's really the most mystical of all of them, in my opinion, because it doesn't say much. The Jewish sages say that the Torah was given at this time, and so they begin the holy year like that. The Bible, though, says that the holy year begins 7 months earlier, which is usually around March or April, and it's called Abib, and the green ear month, also called Nisan today. And then there's the difficult day. It's called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atoning. Ross gave a great talk about this year. And that's a day where we choose to afflict ourselves, usually by fasting, various forms of fasting. Then there's a joyful time, the Feast of the Ingathering at the end, and that is the Tabernacles. And there's 2 days, a first and an 8th day of Tabernacles. And that's a joyous time where we try to give gifts and celebrate. A lot of times, we all want to get together. Jodelle has arranged a few of them, and people have their little gatherings, but you go and you live in a tent or a shelter. I like mine called Hilton usually, but no, I living outside. My wife Patty has made one out in the back. She did glamping, like glamorous camping. She had out in the back, and I don't know what happened. The wind came and blew it all away, and maybe that was the Almighty trying to tell us something. But anyways, that's there. So these divisions, I want to talk about one other thing that kind of happened over here, Dave, if you can just follow me. And so one of the things from this original group of people, the first real ism came after the fall of the kings and the prophets. The rabbis grew in importance. They did not have that importance before. It means teacher. And today they're kind of the leaders, but they had a king before, right? You should read up about the king. God said, I'm your king. And they said, no, we want a king like the other nations, you know. He said, all right, I'll give you one, Saul. And what does that name mean? Ashfor, right? Then along came David and the amazing relationship he had with Jehovah. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, I would ask you to read that. Wow, that's powerful stuff. He said, I'm going to build you a house, Almighty One. And Nathan the prophet said, go ahead. Then Nathan goes to sleep. He wakes up the next morning and says, David, I got bad news for you. God don't want you building no house. And he's like, but he's going to build a house for you. But this house isn't going to be a structure. It'll be the house of the kings of Israel. What a promise. And it's an eternal promise. But what happened is after all of these good and bad kings came and went, the rabbis kind of took over and Judaism appeared, really, as the first of the religions of the peoples of the book. After that, Christianity came, and then Islam came. And what I want to talk about is this. Eschatology rose as time went on. So if this is the level of eschatology and this is time, that's what happened. So eschatology is the concern and study of the end times. And when God's going to come and put the hammer down, the real Day of Atonement. And people got focused on that more than the commandments. I know a lot of people, that's all they want to talk about. It's the end time. It's an interesting subject. But how do I live my day today? That's what we're going to talk about. How do I follow those 10 commands? How do I follow those food laws? How do I celebrate those holy days? How do I love my brother and sister as I love myself? The great talk of the Rabbi Hillel, James Tabor talked about this at the last meeting in Charlotte. He told his students, I'm going to recite the entire Torah on one foot. And after the whole teaching semester, they said, okay, give it to us. And he picks up his foot and says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the meaning of what God wants. Wow, that's powerful. Sounds like another rabbi. So the eschatology, James Tabor gave a term I really like. It's called Enochian Judaism. Enochian Judaism is when they kind of stepped away and started following this end time. So this fervor for a Messiah went out of control. A man. But the books don't say that. Zechariah tells us the Almighty Jehovah is going to stand on the Mount of Olives. I'd rather have God come than any man. I'm sorry. I like a lot of people, but the Almighty being there, then there's no ambiguity whatsoever. If he said it, it's it. Whatever he says. So that's an important thing. So we only know God by his name. That's the first thing that I brought up. And one of the conquerors, Roman conquerors that conquered Judea, came in and wanted to open up that temple and say, I want to see their God. And he got really angry because there's nothing in there. He's like, what, a name? That's I want to choke the idol. He didn't. He couldn't, because that's not what our God is. And our God does not like idols. So that's it. Then the second element, I said there were 3 biblical portions, is the Torah. In Genesis, in Genesis 18:19, it tells us how to keep the way of Jehovah. In the Psalms, David goes on and on and on about this. Psalm 19:7, the perfect way. Psalm 94:12, blessed are those who teach the Torah. And then in one of the Psalms, 119, David says, I love the Torah 18 times in one song. You know, so he says he meditates it. He sees things in his Torah, you know. So that's the point. There are other elements of the commandments that you should look into. It's just how we relate to one another. And most of them are pretty normal things. You cannot marry your sister or your close cousins. These are all just, things. We should be circumcised if we're males. We should take care of a woman's time of menstruation. All the things, the responsibilities that we have. And if you read through them all, I don't really have any problem with any of the commandments of this nature. So the other thing, and this is really kind of done very well in Jodell's book, is the establishment of a government, of courts, the ways of the ruler, what's correct by them things, and that's a really additional element. I don't think all of that additional stuff is important to live your day-to-day life. If we were going to set up a government, and when God sets up his government, I believe he'll do it like that. Finally, there's the plan. And I believe that there's an arc to life on earth. There's an arc to your life, a beginning, a middle, and an end, stages. And a great philosopher said, we're born in innocence and we return to innocence when we die. And there's all these different stages of our development. That's good. I believe there's an arc to life on this earth as humanity. And when that end comes, Jehovah will return. But a lot of people have to be born yet, probably. And they all get their chance. I don't believe that... I believe that God loves all people and wants to love all people. He just chose the Israelites in the land of Israel as a place. A rabbi friend of mine in Israel said, that Mount Moriah, where the Temple Mount was, and where Jacob had the stairway to heaven dream in the book of Genesis. He called that the navel of the world. And it's kind of the way I look at it. This is the place where Jehovah chose. Why? He's Jehovah. He can choose whatever he wants. The other thing that really I believe clarifies who these folks are, Exodus chapter 19 verses 5 through 6. If if you keep my commandments, you're my special treasure. He said to them, you're a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. No one else got that. The Israelites did. The other big issue that David HOROWITZ brought up and that I believe in are the two houses. So we know the Jews are here today, the southern tribes they represent, probably the Benjamites and a lot of Levitical families, the Kohens and so forth. But the northern tribes are to come back at a later time. They were the more apostate, of course, the northern ones. We were the worst of all the people. And so the Jews were allowed to come back. And, there are northern tribe people in the Jewish kingdom, I'm sure. It wasn't just that discreet. I would ask you to read Jeremiah chapter 3, verses 6 through 18, Isaiah chapter 11, 11 through 12, and Hosea 1 through 3 is really good stuff that we should be looking at. Secondly, about the restoration. Obadiah 15 through 20, Micah 2, 12 and 13, and then chapter 5, 3 through 15. Zechariah 8, 9, and 10, read the whole thing. Ezekiel 34 through 37, the two sticks prophecies. In the middle of that, Ezekiel 34, 11 through 13. These, if you don't understand that God's going to put the two back together, you can't understand the prophecies. So for all you eschatological folks, you got to understand this, or it's crazy. There's been a lot of great groups that have talked about this. If you remember Herbert W. Armstrong in the Worldwide Church of God, he wrote the book about America and Great Britain in prophecy. I had no idea. Now, some people have bastardized and made these things a little crazy, but he kind of spoke straightly about where most of them probably are. Simpica Jacovici, or Jacobovich, as he would say, is written, done some documentaries on this subject. There's remnants everywhere of where these Israelite folks went. And God always talks about the faithful remnant and those people that first come back. And I think that's, I think that's what we could be part of. John Hulley, who wrote on this subject and was a great dear friend of ours that Dr. Tabor introduced us to, who was a high-ranking government official, worked for the Kennedys, played flag football with the Kennedys. He spent the end of his life, he left it all and became almost a poor man living in Jerusalem. And we got the privilege of seeing him several times. And he wrote a book called Comets, Christians, and Jews. I would read that book. if you want to know about who those tribes are. Another issue that really is something that people, when they get into their isms, forget is this. Just think about this for a moment. Does God change? And no, he doesn't change. He had these rules, and we have to live by them the best we can. He has mercy, absolutely. But God is the same yesterday, today, and will be the same tomorrow. We're the people who change. We should move towards God in consciousness, not ask him to come down. He ain't coming off the throne. We have to ascend. And if you ask him how, he'll tell you. He's got this book called the Tanakh, this collection of books. It's a library, really. The Tanakh is a library. It's a beautiful collection of books. The more you study this, I mean, if you listen to Ross every Shabbat, it'll blow your mind, some of the key issues that come out and the historicity of the book. Last night, if you were watching, I did describe how science and this book agree more than people even know. That's another story. But the issue is this. Did he change the Sabbath? Read about when the Sabbath was changed. The final decree by the early Orthodox Christians was this. We will have the Sabbath on any other days but the Jews. But what does the book say? The book doesn't say it's the Jewish Sabbath. It said, God said, these are my Sabbaths. You listen to me. That's the thing you got to think about. So God doesn't change, and adultery is still as wrong as it ever was. Murder is still as wrong as it ever was. So I'm just telling you that. And there's some really powerful things that are talked about here. I want you to write down Psalm 145, verse 18. Yahweh is near to all, or Jehovah is near to all who call upon him faithfully. So you have to have faithfulness in there. And Zechariah, he's calling to you folks. Return to me, and I will return to you. Zechariah chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 6 through 9, call to Yahweh while you still can. Because when you die, it's a little too late. And Isaiah chapter 56, all who call on the name of Yahweh will be saved. And you have to be faithful. Also, he adds that thing about the Sabbath. All right? So that is kind of the three pillars. There's the Creator, there's the way, and there's a chosen people in a land. I never knew how important land was till I started listening to Ross Nichols talk about it, until I went there. And I've been like 12 times, and it's stunning. If you look at Israel today, it was away for almost 2,000 years, and it's been restored, and they are doing amazing, amazing things. So that issue is an important issue. And the other thing I wanted to say was that, so what does it mean to keep the Hebrew faith? Here's some things if you read the book, and I'm not going to give you all the quotes. You got to read the book. You got to read the book. It's a good book. I'm telling you. I'm trying to tell you. It's everyone's home almost, but they don't read it. Read the book. And if you have questions, ask. You don't need to even ask us. You can ask anybody, but try to get down to the facts of what the book actually says. Love. This book is about love. Not only that God or the Creator loves us, but that we love the Creator and that we love one another. Be kind to people. Have integrity. One of the things when I grew up, my mom and dad impressed upon me was integrity. And they didn't tell me that. It's the way they lived. They didn't steal. They didn't get drunk. They worked hard. They took care of us children. They focused on being good people, and they had integrity. They didn't lie. They didn't steal. They didn't steal. Also about fairness. One of the things about being fair, as a CEO, I have to look at the people that work for me, and I have to be fair to them. That's an important thing. And it's hard because the original sin is self. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's your focus on yourself, me. And we're born in that, right? In the sense that we're born in ignorance. And as we grow up, we have to care less about ourselves and more about others. And that's the raising of our consciousness as we go towards God, who cares about us. Be godlike. The other thing is this. You have to do good works. Your faith isn't going to be, it's not going to save you. It's part of the salvation, but you have to help others. We saw this Hurricane Michael. It doesn't need to be that. We see poor people all the time. We see people who need a hand up. I'm not saying be stupid about how you help people, but help people. We did such an incredible a job during the floods here. Ross and Dave did, but we also helped them financially and with other supplies because these folks were out there saving people. It didn't matter if they were Christians or atheists or agnostics. It doesn't matter. So be knowledgeable about your faith. Be able to answer correctly to people who would challenge you. Don't be mean, but you're not going to suck me into your isms. You're just not going to do that because I've spent a lot of time. So keeping the faith is an important thing. Following the plan, it's a pretty simple plan. And I remember this statement. You probably remember it. To whom much given is as much as required. Be careful. Another thing I wanted to say that David HOROWITZ really kind of harped on. You got to get the Hellenism and the Romanism out of your religion. And it's hard. I'm going to tell you, it's really hard to get Hellenism and Romanism because it's not only the deification of people, it's the issue of the way they saw things, you can't be saved by a person. You and God have a relationship. You're going to be, your Yom Kippur is coming. And you have to be able to speak for yourself and defend yourself. I don't think you'll need to if you did a good job. If you're like Ronnie Fulcher, you're just going to walk right. No. So the point is that's an important thing. And the Greco-Roman influence impacts me to this day. I'm not going to. Look, I want the streets to be paved with gold in heaven and go down Hallelujah Boulevard, but it's not what the book says. In fact, the book doesn't even say anything about it. This book doesn't say a thing about it. James Tabor said something is beautiful to me because we pine on about what is it like. And my postulate I'll give you after, but James said this: if Jehovah was good enough to make this planet and make us and think of us and make us so beautifully, every day is a miracle, right? Albert Einstein said, you can live if nothing's a miracle or everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. As David Ben-Gurion said, a Jew who doesn't believe in miracles is an idiot. I mean, there's all kinds of miracles that have happened. I paraphrase David Ben-Gurion. But the point is this. If he can take care of us and give us this beautiful life, he's going to do amazing things. My postulate on top of that is this. If he told you right now what heaven was like or the afterlife, you wouldn't even understand it because we're not ready to hear that yet. So people want to put wings on angels and all that stuff, and it's it can make you cry and make you all sad and everything, but at the end of the day, we don't know what happens. I believe the Almighty created us for a reason because he wanted kin. We're of the family of Elohim. I didn't talk about this too much, but God is a term that covers way too many. It's very ambiguous. What happened is Elohim are the mighty ones, and God, Jehovah, is an Elohim, but he's specifically the creator, the Elohim of Elohims, and he created us as sons and daughters. So we're of the same family spiritually as God. You can see what's happened to the world. We've been able to create like God and it's happening, right? I mean, it's amazing what we've been able to do. We've overcome languages. We've overcome all kinds of technical problems. We've seen into the heart of how God designed the universe. We're like him. He's our Father. But the people kind of lose that idea and that understanding when they use the term God, because it's kind of the Greek myths are you talking about, or the Norwegian myths? No, the Elohim of Elohim is a Hebrew thing, and he came from Paran with a fire law in his hand, and it's very specific what he did. That's why you should go to Tamar, by the way, because he went right down the road right by us. It was a beautiful thing. I mean, many thousands of years ago. I mean, I wasn't there, but I can just imagine when he goes back to Zion. So those things are important, that God has a name, and you should remember that name. He has a way, it's called the Torah, and he has a plan. And that plan is implemented by the Israelites, and you could be part of them. And if you're not, well, you can be a joiner. That's what Isaiah 56 says, come and join us. So I don't worry about if I was a Jew or if I'm an Israelite. I'm an Elohim family, created person, and I'm going to join myself to the name of Jehovah. And that's what does that mean? We're going to take a break right now, and we're going to then come back with a panel. And there's some really great people here today. I'm really happy to see some of the folks that are here. And we're going to discuss their views, because I've spoken enough. But also on the chats that are in YouTube and Facebook, tell us what you think, or ask us a question, and we'll try to answer as many as possible, and try to keep it at a basic level of what does it mean? What does the Hebrew faith mean? We can get into all the difficult, complex things, but let's just keep it simple and talk about that. So, Dave, what do you need, about 20 minutes? About 20 minutes, if you could wait, we'll set it up, and we'll have a little panel here, and love to hear what y'all thinking about what I just commented on. It's my commentary, and we're going to hear the commentary of other people of the faith that are mature holders of this faith. Okay, Shabbat Shalom for those that won't come back, and thank you all very much.